Imagine this. One day, your parents lose their home. They come to you begging for a place to stay in the house you worked so hard to buy with your earnings. Would you let them stay? I've been in that exact situation. I agreed to let my parents move in with me. I believed I was doing the right thing and was proud of it. But then my grandfather came to me and told me the whole truth about them. I was utterly shocked. What did my grandfather reveal? And how did I teach them a lesson they would never forget? Stay with me. Let me tell you what happened. Hello, everyone. My name is Ophelia. I'm 30 years old and live in a 3-bedroom house in San Jose. As a software engineer, I was able to buy my own home at the age of 28, and I'm proud of that. I've been independent since I was 18, and everything I have today was built with my own 2 hands. My life now is pretty peaceful. During the day, I focus on my projects at work. In the evenings, I cook for myself, then either go out for coffee with friends or stay in and enjoy a good movie on Netflix. I like going on outdoor trips or visiting my grandfather, Lincoln, on weekends. I usually see him twice a month. Right now, my grandfather is the only family I have left. He's the one who often teaches me life lessons, and he's also the person who helped me escape my parents' dirty scheme. I used to have a father, a mother, and an older sister. But after a family drama about a year ago, our relationship fell apart in ways no one could have imagined. They chose to deceive and take advantage of me instead of respecting what I had worked hard to build. The painful truth about them completely changed the way I see family. From that moment on, my grandfather became my only living relative. Life may seem a little lonely, but I feel at peace knowing I don't have to worry about being caught up in schemes from my own flesh and blood. My family drama happened in June 2024, and even though a year has passed, I still remember every detail as if it happened just yesterday. That day was a perfect weekend afternoon. I was sprawled out on the sofa, enjoying a moment of relaxation after a long, stressful work week when the front gate bell suddenly rang over and over so urgently that I had to rush out. The moment I opened the gate, I froze at the unexpected sight of my parents. No phone call ahead of time, no text message, nothing. They just showed up at my doorstep. But what truly stunned me wasn't their sudden appearance, but the scene behind them. 7 suitcases of various sizes stacked neatly together. Looking at the strange sight in front of me, I awkwardly asked, "Are you getting ready for a long trip?" Instead of answering, they both slowly shook their heads. Their faces carried an unusual gloom and their eyes avoided mine. After a tense moment of silence, my mom hesitated before saying, "Can we come inside?" Even though something felt off, I still nodded and helped my dad carry the heavy suitcases into the entryway. Walking into the living room, the air suddenly felt thick and suffocating. My parents sat side by side on the sofa, sighing repeatedly, like people who had just been through a long battle. Their eyes would glance at me, then quickly turn away as if they were hiding a heavy secret. Unable to bear the stifling silence any longer, I spoke up. "If there's something important, just say it. Don't keep it bottled up like this." My words were like a key that unlocked what they had held back. Immediately, my dad looked me straight in the eye and asked in a trembling voice, "Could you let us stay here for a while?" That question hit me like a bomb going off in my head. I sat up straight and asked, "What happened to your house? Why do you have to stay at mine?" Before my dad could answer, my mom quickly cut in. "We mortgaged the house to get money for a business investment with a friend, but no one could have predicted the risks. The project completely failed. We lost every cent and had to sell the house to pay off the debt. Now we have nowhere to go." Her words struck me like lightning. The house she talked about was worth no less than $700,000, a massive asset they had spent a lifetime building. And at nearly 60 years old, with a stable combined pension of almost $5,000 a month, they could have easily lived comfortably without taking any risky investments. I felt the air squeezed out of my chest as I listened to this heartbreaking story. I stood up, stepped to the front porch to clear my head, and tried to process this unexpected situation. Standing in the cool afternoon breeze outside, I had no idea I was slowly walking right into a carefully crafted trap set by the people I trusted most. After stepping out onto the front porch, I pulled out my phone and called a friend who works in real estate in Richmond, where my parents used to live. I didn't wholly believe my mom's story. There was something about it that didn't sit right with me. After a few rings, Connor, my college friend, picked up. Hearing his familiar voice eased my nerves in the middle of this mess. After some quick small talk, I got straight to the point. I gave Connor the address of my parents' house in Richmond and asked him to check whether they had sold it. Connor understood how important this was and told me he'd get back to me within 2 hours, since he needed time to pull the exact details from the internal system. When the call ended, I took a deep breath and returned inside. I tried to keep my expression neutral until I knew the whole truth. I couldn't rush into deciding to let them stay long term. In a firm tone, I told them, "For now, you can stay here tonight and rest. I need time to consider whether I should let you stay longer." They nodded in agreement, surprisingly easily, without any attempts to persuade or plead with me. Their calm and accepting attitude made me believe even more that what my mom said about losing the house might be true. In my mind, I thought if they were lying, surely there would be signs of anxiety, or they'd try to convince me right away. But their composure made me start to feel guilty for doubting them. Right after that, I led my parents to the guest bedroom in my house so they could rest after such an eventful day. The room was fully equipped, from a comfortable bed to a spacious wardrobe. Once they were settled in, I returned to my space, trying to enjoy the rest of my weekend. Still, my mind couldn't fully relax. I was waiting for Connor's call with the truth about the house. About 2 hours later, my phone suddenly rang. It was Connor calling back right on time. After carefully checking the internal real estate system, he confirmed something that stunned me. My parents' house was sold nearly a month ago for $750,000, about 5% below market value. All the legal paperwork had been completed 3 days before they arrived at my door, and the new owners had already officially moved in. Hearing Connor's detailed information, I quickly thanked him and promised to treat him to a big dinner soon to repay this invaluable favor. When I hung up, I let out a deep sigh of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. At the same time, a faint sense of guilt crept in for having doubted my parents. Still, I knew I had a good reason to be cautious and verify the story because from as far back as I could remember, my parents had always given most of their love and attention to my older sister, Violet. She currently lives and works in Concord, about an hour and a half's drive from my place. With her free-spirited nature, love for independence, and tendency to spend a bit more than she earns, even at 30, she still rents a cramped apartment with less than comfortable conditions. What bothered me most was her habit. Whenever her paycheck couldn't keep up with her lavish lifestyle, she often called home asking for extra money to cover her living expenses. And the moment Violet spoke in that sweet, charming tone she had mastered, my parents would instantly transfer the money to her without hesitation or asking questions. At first, when I heard the story about losing their house, I had thought about asking why they didn't just stay with Violet instead of coming to me. But after thinking it through, I realized her tiny one-bedroom rental could never fit 2 more people, especially at my parents' age when they needed comfort and privacy. And even with Connor's confirmation about the house sale, I still had no intention of letting them live in my house permanently. My initial plan was simple: let them stay temporarily for about a week, while they searched for a rental that fit their financial situation, then start fresh in a new place. With their steady pension, renting a small but cozy home and starting over was completely doable. It seemed like the best solution for everyone. They would have a stable place to live, and I could keep the privacy I had grown used to. But after an unexpected dinner that evening, those initial thoughts and decisions started to waver and completely changed. That evening, my mom took the initiative to go into the kitchen and cook all the dishes I'd loved since I was a kid. When it comes to cooking, she's incredibly skilled. From steaming hot soups to perfectly seasoned grilled meats, everything she made was flawless. At first, I thought she was cooking for me purely out of love and to show gratitude for letting them stay temporarily. I even felt a little touched by her thoughtfulness. But after that meal, they began to reveal their true intentions. For nearly an hour at the table, my parents didn't say a word about staying longer or making any plans. They stuck to casual conversation, asking about my work, showing interest in my life. But once we got to dessert, they finally spoke up with a gentle yet persuasive tone. My mom said, "I think it must be lonely for you living alone. Your house is so spacious with 3 bedrooms. You should let us live with you so the house will be filled with laughter. I can help keep it clean and cook delicious meals daily." Before she could finish, my dad jumped in, speaking softly, but with the weight of family sentiment. "You know, your mom and I aren't getting any younger. renting a place is not only expensive, but also inconvenient. And later, when you get married and have kids, we could help you care for your little family." Their words shook me more than I'd like to admit. I have to acknowledge that living alone can get lonely at times, and the idea of having family around sounded tempting. But I didn't want to make such an important decision too hastily. Seeing that I was still hesitant and hadn't given an answer, my mom suddenly began to cry. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face as she said, "If your father and I weren't in such a desperate, debt-ridden situation, we would never have to come and beg you for help like this. If you don't let us stay with you, we'll have to find a place to live with the homeless." Her words, dripping with hopelessness, pierced my heart. The thought of my elderly parents wandering the streets or living in homeless shelters was unbearable. No daughter would ever want to see her parents in that kind of situation, especially when I was more than capable of taking care of them. At that moment, my dad stepped in again with the one sentence that completely shattered my last line of resistance. Speaking with sincerity, he said, "We're not here to freeload off you like helpless old people. Your mom and I will contribute $2,000 monthly toward living expenses. All we're asking for is a small corner to stay, so we don't have to waste money on rent." After those heartfelt words from my dad and the sincere tears of my mom, my defenses completely collapsed. A few seconds later, I made the decision that I would later regret. In a gentle voice, I told them, "All right, you can stay here with me, and I don't need that $2,000 from you. Just help me cover the monthly electric and water bills enough." The moment I agreed, my mom stopped crying instantly. They stood up and wrapped me in a tight embrace, their faces glowing with happiness. My mom added sweetly, "Thank you so much. I'm truly proud of you." And just like that, after that emotional evening, they officially became residents of the 3-bedroom house I had bought with my hard work and savings. That night, lying in my familiar bed, I smiled with pride and satisfaction. I kept picturing my parents' bright, joyful expressions when they heard my decision. At the time, I genuinely believed I had done something right, something meaningful, by letting them stay. In the days that followed, my house was filled with laughter, joy, and the kind of warmth you'd expect from a perfect family in the movies. A home that had once been quiet with just me now felt cozy and lively with my mom and dad there. Every day after long hours at work, I'd come home to delicious meals my mom had cooked exactly to my taste. The place was always spotless. Every corner, from the living room to the kitchen, was immaculate and organized. The laundry I used to pile up for the weekend because of work was now done by my mom every other day. My closet stayed stocked with fresh, neatly folded clothes. In the mornings, my dad was always up early, exercising in the yard before brewing me a steaming cup of coffee to kickstart my day with energy. Seeing the house so warm and cheerful made me feel I had made the right decision. I truly believed our little family would stay this happy forever. I lived in that sweet illusion until my grandfather unexpectedly appeared in the lobby of my office and revealed the brutal truth hidden behind it all. That was when the real family drama hit me like a storm, and it became the moment I lost the people I once loved and trusted the most in my life. I still remember it clearly. Like any other, it was a Monday morning. At that point, my parents had lived with me for exactly 1 week. That afternoon, right after I wrapped up an important meeting with my boss and colleagues about launching a new project, the receptionist suddenly knocked on the meeting room door. She told me that Mr. Lincoln, my grandfather, was waiting for me in the company lobby. He had already been there for 15 minutes. When I heard his name, I quickly gathered my documents and rushed downstairs to meet him. He had come to my office for the first time in the 2 years I had worked there. Before that, the closest he'd gotten was when I drove him past the building a few times on the way to his regular weekend checkups. As soon as he saw me from a distance, he stood up abruptly from the sofa in the lobby, his face filled with worry. In a voice brimming with concern, he said, "I've been trying to call you since this morning, but couldn't reach you. I was so worried that I had to take a taxi all the way here to find you." Hearing those words, I suddenly remembered switching my phone to airplane mode earlier that morning to focus on back-to-back meetings. That explained why he hadn't been able to reach me all day. When I turned airplane mode off, dozens of missed call notifications and messages popped up on my screen, 5 from my grandfather, all within the same morning. Seeing him so worried stirred a mix of emotions in me, touched by his love and anxious about what could be so urgent that he came looking for me in person. Since company rules strictly forbade personal visits in the lobby, I quickly texted my boss asking permission to leave for an hour to handle a family emergency. Once I got the green light, I carefully helped my grandfather cross the street to a small coffee shop, a quiet, private spot where we could talk freely. In the quiet of the shop, after ordering 2 cups of hot coffee and waiting for the server to bring them over, I turned to my grandfather with a concerned look and asked, "What's so important that you had to go through all the trouble of coming to my office in person?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he silently took a sip of coffee before asking me a question of his own. "Have your parents moved into your house?" The unexpected question caught me off guard. I figured my parents must have already told him about their current situation, so I nodded and replied, "That's right. They said they had to sell their house to pay off debts after a failed investment, and they came to ask if they could stay with me for a while until they get back on their feet." After that, I began to tell him in detail everything that had happened the previous week, from how my parents had shown up unexpectedly with 7 suitcases, to the story they told about their failed investment, to how they begged to stay. I also told him I had carefully verified the information through Connor, my college friend in real estate. When I finished recounting the whole thing, my grandfather still said nothing. He looked at me silently, his eyes filled with thought, as if he was weighing something serious. Feeling unsettled by the profound and mysterious expression on his face, I couldn't help but press him. "Is there something about my parents I should know? Why are you asking me this?" This time he gave a slight nod. The grave look on his weathered face made a wave of unease rise inside me, like he was about to reveal something terrible. A few seconds passed, each one stretching out like hours. Finally, my grandfather looked me straight in the eye. In a voice sharp and unwavering, he said, "Your father and mother are cruelly deceiving you. They didn't lose their money in a failed investment. The truth is they sold their house to buy Violet a new home in Concord. She completed the purchase only 2 weeks ago." His words struck me like lightning. My heart skipped a few beats, my blood turning to ice. I couldn't believe that my parents, the people who had given me life and raised me, could be so heartless and ruthless. Inside me, 2 powerful emotions clashed violently, a wave of searing anger at being deceived and exploited so calculatedly, and a deep unease about what might come next. About 2 minutes after taking in my grandfather's shocking revelation, I regained some composure. Though anger still burned inside me, I forced myself to stay calm and asked, "Can you tell me more about this?" He took a heavy sip of coffee before recounting the details of an unbelievable story. Just the day before, Violet had visited him with an unusually bright and excited look. During dinner at his house, Violet enthusiastically boasted about buying a new Concord home for a hefty $700,000. My grandfather was stunned. He knew my sister's nature all too well. Violet had never been the type to save or accumulate money. She lived freely, spending impulsively. For her to suddenly have enough for such a large purchase was beyond surprising. When he asked where she got the money, Violet confidently claimed it came from a wildly successful investment she'd made with friends. She said she had hit it big and decided to use the winnings to buy her dream home. At the time, my grandfather believed her story. But after dinner, Violet stepped onto the porch to take a private phone call with a friend. My grandfather hadn't intended to eavesdrop. He was still in the living room watching TV. But Violet assumed he wasn't paying attention and spoke loudly, making no effort to hide anything. What he overheard shook him to his core. Violet openly admitted to her friend that our parents had paid for the new Concord house. There had been no successful investment, no big win. She even bragged about how, after selling their house, my parents had moved into my home to give her complete freedom and comfort in her new place. The most disturbing part was what came next. Violet accidentally revealed the full extent of my parents' plan during that call. They intended to live in my house permanently, not just temporarily, as they had told me. They had fabricated the story about a failed business investment to hide the truth, banking on my sense of family loyalty and compassion to convince me to let them stay for the rest of their lives. Violet even boasted that I would never dare to refuse or kick them out, because if I did, they would tell everyone I was an ungrateful daughter who had thrown her aging parents out in their time of need. They knew such a story would destroy my reputation. As my grandfather relayed every detail, a wave of pure fury rose inside me. The sense of betrayal and cold-blooded manipulation was enough to make me feel sick. At that moment, I had only one thought: to get home as fast as possible and throw them out of the house I had bought with my hands, sweat, and sacrifice. After finishing the story, my grandfather looked at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with compassion. Finally, he said, "I've been thinking about telling you this all night, and I've decided to stand by you in this. You've endured far too much favoritism from them already." Those words sent a faint warmth through the heart that had been frozen solid moments ago, because at least in this family riddled with lies, there was still someone who could see and acknowledge the unfair favoritism my parents had shown for so many years. I didn't need my grandfather to protect or shield me from what was coming. I didn't need him to make up for or fix my parents' mistakes. All I needed was for him to see it, to acknowledge it, and that alone was enough to make me feel I wouldn't be alone in the fight ahead. After my grandfather left, I went back to my office, but there was no way I could focus on any work. No matter how hard I tried to look at my computer screen or the project documents before me, my mind was completely occupied. The story my grandfather had just told kept replaying in my head over and over. Memories from the past, old events like slow-motion film reels, flashed through my mind, taking me back to the days when we all lived under the same roof. Since we were kids, Violet was the golden child in my parents' eyes. She was exactly 2 years older than I was, and by all logic, I should have received a little more attention and care as the younger sibling. But things couldn't have been further from that natural order. All that favoritism stemmed from one undeniable difference between us, our appearance. Violet was born with angelic beauty. Smooth, fair skin, large sparkling eyes, glossy hair, and a smile as sweet as candy. On the other hand, I had an ordinary face, nothing striking or remarkable that would make people turn their heads. Her knack for always knowing how to show up at the right moment to attract praise and attention made it worse. No matter how hard I tried, I could never do what she did so effortlessly. Whenever our parents had guests over, Violet would dash off to her room the moment she heard them arrive. Within minutes, she'd reappear in the living room wearing her prettiest dress, glowing like a princess straight out of a fairy tale. Naturally, my parents would beam with pride and happiness when the compliments started flowing. Besides her natural beauty, she had an extraordinary gift for conversation. Whenever strangers visited our home, Violet could always find something to compliment them on, sometimes their appearance, other times the items or accessories they wore. Her sincere and tactful words never failed to make people feel pleased and warm toward her. I was the complete opposite. Whenever guests arrived, I would slip away to my room until they left. Part of it was because I felt insecure about my appearance compared to my beautiful sister, and part of it was because I didn't want to hear the uncomfortable comparisons people always seemed to make. Countless times, visitors would unknowingly stab me right in the heart with comments like, "Just look at Violet, so pretty and sweet. Why didn't Ophelia inherit those wonderful looks?" And sometimes my parents would join in the damage with remarks like, "Ophelia, you should learn from Violet's social skills. She's well-liked and knows how to handle herself." Over time, those endless comparisons chipped away at me, little by little, until I became withdrawn, insecure, and desperate to hide in the shadows of my own home. Violet captured my parents' love and affection from childhood, thanks to her natural beauty and outstanding social skills. The favoritism was evident in the way they treated us on special occasions. My birthdays were always simple. A store-bought cake my mom had picked up quickly from the nearest supermarket, the four of us singing "Happy Birthday" around the cold, quiet dining table. On the other hand, Violet's birthdays were grand productions, events with 30 to 40 guests, including relatives, friends, and neighbors. The primary purpose was to show off their beautiful, talented daughter to everyone they knew. The unequal treatment was even more glaring when it came to education and hobbies. They had no problem paying for Violet to take piano lessons. But when I asked for $500 to buy a guitar so I could teach myself at home, they acted like it was too much. My father even told me bluntly, "A woman doesn't need to be good at the arts. As long as you can make good money and support your family, that's enough." Those words have stayed with me to this day. Later, as we got older and entered college, the favoritism became even more apparent and painful. When Violet got her acceptance letter, my parents didn't hesitate to throw a big party with over 30 guests to celebrate. Then, they bought her a brand new car to make commuting to school easier. Her expensive tuition and monthly living costs were fully covered, so she never had to worry about money. When I received the news that I had earned a full scholarship in information technology, a dream achievement for many, my father only glanced at the letter and said coldly, "Not bad, but you still need to work harder." In the following days, I had to juggle multiple part-time jobs to cover my living expenses because they offered me no support. They didn't look surprised or embarrassed when I finally asked about the blatant favoritism, almost as if they had rehearsed the answer. My mom calmly said, "Things at work haven't been great for us lately, so we can't support you like we did for Violet. Besides, you're a woman. You should be more independent and strong." That was when I realized I had to handle everything independently and couldn't depend on anyone. And in a way, their ruthless favoritism became the fuel that drove me to my current success. By age 28, I had earned a six-figure salary and bought myself a comfortable three-bedroom house through hard work. I was genuinely proud of what I'd achieved. They could favor Violet as much as they wanted. They could even sell their house and use every cent to buy her a new one. I wouldn't feel jealous or bitter about that, but I could never accept them giving all their money to Violet and forcing me to take responsibility for their lives. That was a level of injustice I would never tolerate. Sitting in my office that afternoon, I knew this family drama could worsen my relationship with them, maybe even beyond repair, but I had already decided I would expose the truth and never let them take advantage of me again. About an hour after my unexpected meeting with my grandfather, I contacted Connor again to verify the details. I told him exactly what my grandfather had just revealed so he could understand the seriousness of what was going on. Then I asked Connor to use his industry connections to check for my sister's name in the property listings for the Concord area. I needed to know the exact date she had purchased the house and the price she paid for it. I also asked if he could find any money transfers from my parents' accounts to Violet's, but he turned me down. Connor explained, "Sorry, Ophelia, that's something I can't do. Banks have rigorous security systems, and no one would risk leaking personal transaction information like that unless there's an official request from the police or a court." Hearing that, I realized this would not be as simple as I had hoped. Still, I already had a plan for dealing with the situation. I told Connor that just confirming my sister's property details would be enough for the first step. Connor immediately agreed and ended the call so he could get to work. Barely 30 minutes later, he sent me an important email. Inside was the whole record and detailed information about the house Violet now owned. My heart pounded as I opened the document. Everything matched my grandfather's words. The house was officially handed over to her 2 weeks ago, and the purchase price was exactly $700,000. With this critical evidence, I immediately requested to leave work early for a family emergency. Then, with determination at its peak, I drove home as fast as possible, ready to carry out the confrontation I had been preparing for. Around 4 p.m., I pulled into the driveway. Hearing the sound of my car engine outside, my parents hurried to the door to greet me. They looked surprised to see me home earlier than usual. My dad immediately asked with concern, "Why are you home so early today? Is something going on?" I didn't answer his question. Instead, standing right there in front of both of them, I raised my voice and said firmly, "Get out of my house now." My sudden demand hit them like lightning on a quiet afternoon. My mom's face quickly shifted to confusion and panic. She asked in a trembling voice, "What happened, sweetheart? Why are you suddenly kicking us out like this?" Before she could say more, my dad cut in with a tone of outrage. "Didn't you agree just last week to let us stay here? Now you're suddenly changing your mind? Where are we supposed to go?" Their innocent, wronged expressions made me let out a bitter laugh. They were still putting on a show, convinced I had no idea what was happening behind their fake smiles. A few seconds later, keeping my voice steady, I said, "Go live with Violet. Didn't you sell your house to buy her a new one?" That blunt question froze them on the spot. My mom's voice was shaky, but trying to stay calm. "Violet bought that house with her own money. We didn't give her anything. We really did lose our house because of a failed investment." Her words made my chest tighten. Even after being caught, they protected Violet and kept lying to me. I didn't want to waste another minute arguing. Looking them straight in the eyes, I gave my final proposal. "Fine. Then let's go to the bank together and review all your transactions. If there hasn't been a single transfer to Violet in the last 60 days, I'll publicly admit I was wrong and give you this house. But if there's proof you sent her money, you move out immediately and pay me an extra $50,000. Do you dare to take that challenge?" When I laid that ultimatum, my mom and dad were utterly silent. And that guilty silence was all the proof I needed that everything my grandfather had said and everything I had suspected was the undeniable truth. After nearly 5 minutes of tense silence, I couldn't hold back any longer. All the anger I had been bottling up exploded, and I shouted with fury, "Get out of my house right now!" Seeing my outburst, my father also lost control. Forgetting the role of a parent entirely, he yelled straight into my face with aggression, "You don't get to talk to us like that!" The two shouts echoed through the quiet neighborhood, catching the attention of Mr. Jordan, my 60-year-old neighbor, who stepped out onto his porch. He looked over toward my house with concern and asked, "Ophelia, is everything all right? Do you need any help?" I quickly thanked him and explained briefly that it was just a minor family disagreement and that I could handle it myself. Understanding the private nature of the situation, Mr. Jordan didn't press further. He nodded and quietly went back inside. When I turned back to my parents, they still had no intention of cooperating or admitting wrongdoing. My dad stood tall with his arms crossed, wearing the look of someone who believed he was the one being wronged. My mom just stared at me with eyes full of blame. Thanks to Mr. Jordan's timely interruption, I calmed down enough to keep my voice steady, cold, but resolute. I told them, "You have exactly 30 minutes to pack your things and leave my house. If you're still here after 30 minutes, I'll call the police to remove you." With that blunt ultimatum, I walked past them without another glance and headed straight to my bedroom. Sitting in my familiar desk chair, I hesitated about what I had just done. After all, they were still my parents, the ones who gave me life and raised me. But my resolve grew stronger when I thought about their calculated scheme and how they had exploited my sense of family to deceive me. No matter what, I had to get them out of this house to protect what I had built with my own two hands. 30 minutes passed, and the house was still silent. When I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the living room, they sat quietly on the sofa, showing no sign of packing their things. At that point, I had no other choice. I took out my phone and called the police, reporting that 2 people were unlawfully occupying my home without permission. After I gave the full address, the officer on the line told me they'd arrive within 10 minutes, since a patrol car was already nearby. As soon as I ended the call, my father looked straight at me and gave a mocking smile before speaking in a bitter tone. "Perfect, daughter. We raised you from birth, gave you everything, and now you're calling the cops to throw your parents out of the house. I guess having money means you don't care about anyone anymore." His words cut into me like sharp blades, but I refused to answer or get dragged into another argument. Without saying a word, I opened the front door, stepped out onto the porch, and waited for the police to arrive to settle everything once and for all. In less than 10 minutes, a white police cruiser pulled up right outside my gate. Around 4:20, 2 male officers stepped into the yard in crisp uniforms. After briefly explaining the situation, they asked me to provide proof of ownership for the house. I quickly went to my room, opened in the safe, and pulled out all the legal documents for them to review. Once they confirmed my identity and verified my parents' background with headquarters, the officers stepped inside and politely asked my parents to leave the premises. At first, my parents stood their ground and refused to cooperate. They insisted this was their daughter's house and that they had every right to stay. However, one of the more experienced officers cited the exact state law. According to the residency records they had just checked, my parents had only been living in my home for 8 days. As the legal owner, I had the full authority to ask them to leave at any time without giving a reason. If they continued to refuse, the police would file an official report and I could press charges for unlawful occupation of private property. Hearing that clear legal explanation, my mom and dad suddenly turned pale, losing all the confidence they had moments earlier. Without a second warning, they got up and went to their room to pack their belongings. While they prepared their luggage, the 2 officers carefully took down my detailed statement to keep on file at the station. They also informed me that if my parents ever returned to live in my home without permission, I would have solid legal grounds to take them to court, and the penalties they would face then would be severe. Looking at my written statement being recorded so thoroughly and professionally, I knew that justice had finally been served and that the law had sided with the one in the right in this bitter family conflict. 20 minutes later, my parents pushed 7 suitcases out the door. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had arrived with 7 suitcases and were leaving with the same 7. As they passed by where I was standing, my father suddenly stopped. He looked me dead in the eye, his gaze full of hatred, and said in an icy, chilling voice, "You'll regret this decision." Hearing that clear threat, one of the officers standing nearby immediately stepped in. "Mr. Gabriel, I suggest you watch your words. Our body cameras have recorded your threat in full. If you take any action that harms Ms. Ophelia's reputation or safety, the charges you'll face will be extremely serious." At the officer's stern warning, my father's face went pale, and panic flickered across his expression. He stammered in response, I was just trying to scare her a little. I didn't mean anything by it." After that feeble excuse, he turned to me one last time and declared with cruel finality, "From this moment on, I have only one child, Violet." His words weighed on me like a heavy stone pressing into my chest. But deep down, I knew that sometimes cutting ties completely with toxic relationships is the only way to move forward and live in peace. After my parents left the house with defeat written all over their faces, I politely walked the 2 police officers to the gate, deeply grateful for their professional and timely help. When I returned to the familiar living room, I let out a long breath of relief, as if a massive weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. At the very least, I had protected myself and the home I had worked so hard to earn through honest labor. Right after that, I picked up my phone and called my grandfather, recounting what had happened during this turbulent afternoon. He listened silently to the entire story without interrupting once. When I finished, I implored him, "Are you angry at me for throwing them out like that?" Without a moment's hesitation, he answered with firm resolve, "I'm not angry at you at all. You did exactly the right thing. I'm proud of you." Hearing those sincere words of support brought warmth into my cold, heavy heart, because at least I still had one person in my family who would always stand by me and support my decisions, my beloved grandfather. After my parents moved out, I assumed they would go straight to live with Violet. With the $700,000 house they had bought her, there was no doubt they'd have plenty of space to live comfortably. But a week later, when I visited my grandfather and heard what had happened, I couldn't help but feel an unexpected pang of pity for them. It turned out that after leaving my house in humiliation, they moved in with Violet, just as I had predicted. But they lasted only 3 days before she called the police and threw them out of the very house they had bought for her. During those 3 days, Violet kept complaining that they disrupted her privacy. She insisted their presence was interfering with the free lifestyle she was used to. When my parents desperately reminded her that the house had been paid for entirely with their money, Violet coldly denied it. She claimed it was her property and they had no right to interfere. As the argument escalated, she didn't hesitate to call the police and demand that they be removed immediately, even though my parents could prove that the $700,000 had come directly from their account. The official property deed listed only Violet's name. Worse still, the bank transfer to Violet's account was clearly stated in the transaction description, "A gift from Mom and Dad to our beloved daughter." With such concrete legal evidence, my parents had no grounds to sue or reclaim the massive sum or the house they had sacrificed everything to buy. After being mercilessly kicked out by their cherished daughter, they turned to my grandfather as their last hope, begging for help in this desperate situation. But he firmly refused. He only gave them $5,000 for temporary expenses, then told them to leave and take care of their lives. From the sadness in his voice as he recounted the story, I could tell he felt sorry for them. But there was nothing more he could do for people who had driven themselves into such ruin. After hearing it all, I could only think this was the steep price they had to pay for years of blind love and ruthless favoritism toward Violet. It's been a year since that painful family drama, and life has slowly settled into its usual rhythm. My grandfather is now 78 years old, but still healthy and sharp-minded. Life with him is truly peaceful. On weekends, I often visit, and those afternoons have become the most precious moments of my week. He never stops patiently teaching me essential life lessons. Every story, every piece of advice he shares carries profound wisdom. I'll always be grateful to him, because without him, I might never have uncovered the cruel scheme my parents had been quietly plotting. As for my parents, with a combined pension of nearly $5,000 a month, they decided to move to another state with a much lower cost of living. This way, they could enjoy a comfortable life without worrying too much about daily expenses. And Violet, karma finally came for her in a way no one could have predicted. With the $700,000 house my parents had sacrificed everything to buy her, she decided to mortgage it to get money for her boyfriend to invest in high-risk cryptocurrency projects. The result was disastrous. Every single cent was lost. Later, Connor told me he'd learned the truth. Her boyfriend was a professional con artist, skilled, extremely cunning, with handsome looks, polished manners, and persuasive charm. He had managed to scam no fewer than 10 different women, all of whom willingly handed over their money for him to spend without question. I didn't feel sad or pity for her when I heard this. Instead, I felt a sense of satisfaction and justice. The cold-hearted ingratitude she had shown to our parents finally returned to her with a heavy price. After that incident, I never heard from her again, as if she had vanished entirely from my life. After everything that has happened, I only wish for one thing, for my grandfather to stay healthy and by my side. That alone would be enough to make me feel happy and whole. And today, after having coffee with a friend and hearing his heartbreaking story about being taken advantage of by his own family, losing over $30,000 in the process, I decided to share my personal story with you as a heartfelt piece of advice. After everything that happened to me and to my friend, through painful yet invaluable lessons, I want to send you an important message. Never let family ties become a tool for relatives to exploit you. Always know when to stand up and protect yourself if necessary, even if it's the hardest decision you'll ever have to make. Family bonds are sacred, but they should never be an excuse for you to be deceived or taken advantage of. When the people closest to you are willing to sacrifice your happiness and future for their gain, protecting yourself is not an act of coldness, it's an act of necessity. Sometimes, to truly be happy, we must be brave enough to say no to the people we love most. It's never easy, but it's something you must do to safeguard what you've built with your hard work. That brings my story to an end. And before I close this emotional chapter, I want to leave you with a question to reflect on. If you were ever unfortunate enough to face a situation like mine, how would you handle it? Would you stay silent, accept it, and let your parents continue living with you even after discovering their deception? Or would you, like me, choose to stand up, fight back, and claim justice for yourself? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts and perspectives on this. Share your views in the comments below. Different perspectives will help us all better understand life. And if this story touched your emotions and made you reflect deeply, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any future stories. Also, please like and share this story so more people can take away a valuable lesson for themselves. Thank you for staying with me through this long story. I'll see you again in the next meaningful chapter.